Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last of the series of the Global Journalism Seminars at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. I'm Meera Selva, Director of the Journalism Fellowship at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, and I am here today to talk about some work we've been doing all term on women and news, and this has stemmed from a couple of things. It stemmed from projects that I've worked on with Simja Andy and Rasmus Kleis Nielsen this year on gender and leadership, looking at the amount of top media brands that are led by women and the number of outlets where people see news that's basically selected for them by women. But it's also been fed largely in part by the fact that this year, for the first time, we've had an all-women fellowship, journalist fellowship at the Reuters Institute. We've had 6 women from around the world in a kind of socially distanced room, freezing cold, with the windows and doors wide open, wrapped up in scarves, but having, quite frankly, amazing discussions about women in newsrooms, women as consumers of news, the portrayal of women in news, and crucially, what can be done to serve this audience, because this isn't even really a diversity issue, it's an equality issue. Women are 50% of the population, so any idea that they're not equally served in news as men is ridiculous. So what I'm going to do today is 2 things. I'm going to run through some of the data that we have in our digital news report about news consumption, where I've taken existing data and pulled out certain facts by men and women to see whether there are any differences. And then I'm going to ask the women of the Journalist Fellowship Program to participate as well and share some of their inputs. And all the way through, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. This is an interactive, lively discussion hour, so please, we do really want your thoughts. Thank you. So give me a moment while I screen share. If I can be made co-host, please, so I can screen share. Thank you. So what we have here is a discussion on what women want, attitudes to news and newsrooms. And what we did here was take data from 11 different countries: Kenya, South Africa, Germany, Finland, Mexico, the UK, Japan, the United States, Hong Kong, and South Korea, and Brazil, and look at how women use news in this. And like I said, this is data that we got from the digital news report, which is free to read on our website. We picked these countries because we have data and because it's to kind of get as wide a geographic spread as possible, but also to present things in as comparative a way as possible. So the first thing we looked at is the number of respondents who say they're extremely or very interested in news. And what we found pretty much across the board is that men are far more likely to say that they are extremely interested in news or very interested in news compared to women. This raises a few issues and I think the primary thing is, who is the news for? And the second issue, which we'll discuss later, is who has time to consume news and when. And thirdly, having said there's 2 points, it's in whose name is the news being produced? Is it being produced? Who are you holding in your mind as the potential viewer and the potential reader? Are you assuming that there is kind of a man consuming your news, or are you assuming there's a woman? It's not as straightforward as saying women want issues to do with childcare and health. It's just to do with perspectives, the language that's used, the imagery that's used, and the tone that's used in sharing the news. The second thing we looked at in there is some political news. And again, when we look at the percentage of respondents who are extremely or very interested in political news, across the board, men are more likely to say they are extremely or very interested in political news. This is data that was gathered at basically before the pandemic in late 2019, early 2020. So we don't have data from news consumption during COVID-19, but in an earlier seminar with Luba Kasova, we had a very good discussion about how women have essentially been excluded from the news. They have not been present as the scientists or the politicians leading the press conferences in various countries talking about COVID-19. They haven't been quoted in the news. Their concerns haven't been reported on. So when we have this data like this, something that says women tend to not be interested in political news compared to men, again, it raises the issue of what politics, who's being quoted, how are things being framed, how are female politicians being portrayed, how are issues being portrayed when women do speak, what are they being quoted on? Are they being asked their opinions on political news, or are they being asked for their opinions on other areas, and where does the political commentary exist? what I wanted to talk about is women in news, and what I'm going to do here is screen share. There we go. And I think we got to this slide. We were looking at health, percentage of respondents who are extremely or very interested in health and education. One thing we have learned this year is that the personal is political, and there is no news that can be about politics that doesn't also cover health and education of society. Again, if we look at COVID-19 reporting this year, the role of television has been incredibly important. After a kind of general decline, what we have seen this year is that a vast number of users have turned to TV and radio for news, but certainly to public sector broadcasters. At the start of the pandemic in springtime, there was a massive spike in news usage as people turned to things like the BBC, to the public sector broadcasters that they trusted for news. And what we see here all through, and again from data from before the pandemic, is women are more likely to use TV news than men. We can discuss the reasons for this. Part of this might be to do with cost, that TV is kind of a household commodity that's just there, and also it's on in the background, so it's often on at a time that that people can do other things. And conversely, the percentage of respondents who go directly to a news site, what we see there is that in quite a lot of countries, not in Finland, Kenya, Brazil, and Mexico, but in other countries, women are less likely to go directly to a news site. They're more likely to get their news either via their social networks or via television. And I've called this one the first rule of Flight Club, because we wanted to look at how women consume news on social media. And what we saw significantly is the percentage of respondents who use Twitter for news is relatively gendered. Men are far more likely to get their news on Twitter than women in most countries. In fact, in all countries, in Brazil, Finland, and Germany, the differences are narrower, but they're still there and the trend is still valid. And again, I'd be really interested in discussions to think about reasons why. Part of this is related to research we've been doing elsewhere on the online, how women are treated in the online space, and the fact that women often are kind of trolled quite severely online, but also again that Twitter can often be a talking shop where journalists talk to other journalists. It's kind of quite closed. It's a public discussion that's also between people who are kind of somehow connected to each other. And I think in a lot of countries, women feel kind of excluded from that space, or are just simply not interested in spending that time there using it for that. Same with YouTube. Men are more likely to get their news on YouTube than on men, except in Kenya, where the figures are roughly similar. And then this is really interesting data that I really would like to unpick in the discussion. And it's to do with the percentage of respondents who respond to a news story on news sites. Men are far more likely to respond to a news story on news sites than women in all countries. There aren't significant differences in a lot of the countries, but there are still differences. And there is also data that says that when you look at who gets attacked online for commenting on news sites, that actually often men are more likely to be attacked online than women for commenting on news sites. But that's also partly because they're more likely to be commenting on the first place. They're far more likely to be commenting in a kind of quite opinionated way. And crucially, when they do get attacked, they're getting attacked for what they say or for their arguments. When women get attacked online, it might happen less frequently, but when it does happen, it's very personal. It's sexualized, it's ad hominem, it's a kind of very personal attacks. Women are being attacked for being women, whereas men are attacked for what they say in this space. And this again is one of the loveliest findings of the report, of the data, I think, is the percentage of respondents who talk with friends about a news story face to face. Kenya, South Africa, Finland, Hong Kong, Japan, women are far more likely to talk about news to their friends face to face than men are. This kind of fights against the argument that women are somehow not interested in news or don't want to consume news. They absolutely do want to consume news, and they do want to discuss news. They want to do it in their networks with people they trust, use it as kind of community building, shared experience. And I think this is something news organizations in particular can really look at and focus on, to create content that can be shared in this very personal way, face to face. So basically talking points and discussion points that can be used amongst people who know each other, not just people on the online space. And then we just wanted to look at whether there's a difference between trust in media between men and women. And this is one where there isn't a huge difference. There are slight variations, but overall, we found that across the board, men and women trust news roughly the same. and ditto when we look at percentage of respondents who are concerned over what is fake or real online. There are differences, but they're fairly minor differences. So I think these are two areas, kind of concerns over fake news and concerns over trust, where I wouldn't want to labour the point. But I think what is more interesting is this idea of where women get their news, how they share it, and what they're doing with that. With that, thank you. I'm going to stop slide sharing and turn to the journalist fellows who are in the room down there to ask their thoughts, because we had a workshop at the start of halfway through the term about women and news, where the idea was to talk about what, not you as journalists, but what do you as what would your friends, your sisters, your mothers, your colleagues, the people you went to university with, what would they, how do they see news? How do they use it? And what's the purpose of news for them? And I think we had some really interesting discussions there. So I'm going to kind of hand it over to Ramisha, Sangmi, and to Rebecca, who are in the room, and also to the other fellows who've returned home and are on Zoom. But also crucially, if you have issues in chat, please do put them in the chat box and we'll bring them in. Thank you. Who wants to start there? Rebecca? Hi.
I will. Am I on? I think thanks for this opportunity to talk about this. It's really fascinating that this has come up again and again as a subject, and there are so many sort of universalities, despite the fact that we all come from very different territories. And I think kind of reflecting on the information that you've found and the research that you've done, I think what I keep coming back to is that we sometimes as journalists have a tendency to make news for ourselves. And what we need to be doing is making news for our audience and understanding what it is that our audience wants, the spaces that they're in, and explaining that news in a way that is relevant, that is helpful, that is engaging, that will want people to connect with that. And I think the kind of the next logical step to that thought is that we need to make sure that we've got the people in the room making those decisions who are in the audience as well. So we come back to our old friend diversity within news editorial at a sort of a high level. And I don't just mean gender, although that's incredibly important. Excuse me. I mean socioeconomic diversity, geographical diversity, views from people who come from different educational backgrounds as well. Because I think, we need to have those stories and take on those stories reflected by the people that are making the decisions. And I think that in order to get those sorts of people in the room, we need to really consider how we recruit as well, because very often we find the same types of people coming through and getting into leadership within news organisations. And I think if we want to kind of change our output and attract sort of new audiences and retain the audiences we have, we need to consider the way that we're recruiting people, and maybe not going for that sort of 40 minutes of being able to speak with great confidence and fluency, but actually sort of consider potential and consider reaching out to different sort of areas that we wouldn't necessarily have always have gone to pick our new recruits.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I'll pass on to Ramisha.
Thank you. Ramisha, you're muted. Ramisha, you're muted. Thank you.
We have heard so far from so many different people that when women are leading newsrooms, when women are sitting on tables, which are, taking care of social media, which are taking care of broadcasting, the society, the situation, and the atmosphere around those people is a bit more egalitarian. So, I'm not implying something, but that's what people generally feel, because there has been a culture where, newsrooms, or where groups on social media, for example, Facebook, when they're, controlled, when they're moderated by males, when they're moderated by men, they seem to be a bit partisan, a bit lopsided, even if they're just focusing on lifestyle content, or if they're just focusing on news content. So what I personally believe is that if we have more female representation, which is which lacks a lot in a country like mine, because I come from Pakistan, and we have very few women who are editor-in-chief. We have very few women who are in high positions, women who are in positions who can make decisions, who can call out people on doing something wrong. And I mean, if we would have women on these high managerial positions as well, I think there would be some change, because I was myself interviewed for a job which I was doing. I was just recently, I am doing. I was interviewed by a panel of 5 men. I mean, I was not. I managed. I was not confused, but I managed somehow. They liked me, everything. But I would have really liked to see a woman in the panel, a single woman even. So I mean, it's like a more, I mean, it would be a bit more balanced if there's some women representation, I mean, to some extent even. And if I come out from broadcasting, if I come from newsrooms to social media, what I have seen and what I've experienced from a consumer's eye, when I look at my friends, when I look at my family, when I look at the females in my friend circle and my family circle who use social media very extensively, in which it includes Facebook, it includes Instagram, it includes WhatsApp and Twitter sometimes. So on these platforms, most of the times we see some pages, we see some groups which are, I mean, in my country, usually moderated by men. There are men moderators, or if there are multiple moderators, or if there are multiple founders of the pages or groups, most of them are men. And I have seen some groups where women are the moderators, where women are the founders of those pages and those groups. And I have myself experienced that the conversations which go on in those groups, the kind of comments which we see in those groups and on those pages, on the posts in those pages and on those groups, I mean, they provide a safe space for women to express themselves. Because in most of the places, women are afraid to actually comment, to actually express their opinion. Why? Because they know that people are going to judge them no matter what. And this just happens everywhere. I mean, it's very common in Pakistan. I mean, it's very common on different platforms in Pakistan. So, yeah, so I think that with a bit more female representation, not just in newsrooms, but on social media as well, not just for different groups in social media, but on the social media teams or on the social media departments in different newsrooms, I think there can be a better difference, you know, a good difference can come. Sangvi, over to you.
Thanks so much, Ramesh. I think it's a really interesting point about curation and who's curating the news here. Thank you. Sangvi from South Korea. Hi.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, the presentation is fascinating, super intriguing, and also I have managed like a couple of YouTube channels for my organization, which is a public broadcasting in South Korea, and one of the channel is called Secret of Life. Sounds like a name of cult, but which is not. The channel is about health and lifestyle news and documentary videos, and I find it fascinating that we are the only channel among 100 different our company's channel that having more female subscribers and users, and more than 58% of our viewers are female audience, and we are, I think it is significantly important for us to diversify our video content about health and lifestyle, not oversimplify that this is all for women. So it's not really women's content, but also the content for everyone are more likely to engage with a female audience. And also in terms of having top editors in news and media organization, I think it is very interesting because I was a little bit surprised that South Korea had a little bit more top editors in news organization than I had expected. it sounds a little bit embarrassing, but it is true. And I have been wondering why I haven't really thought about having top editors in our, like female top editors in our organizations for a while. And probably we have, but I have not realized it yet. And a couple of days ago, we talked to Anu,
the editor-in-chief of Helsing and Salamat,
the largest Finnish daily newspaper that our fellow Jenny is working, amazing newspaper. And she told me that her organization has been trying to hire middle managers, hiring more middle managers with diverse backgrounds, like socioeconomic backgrounds, gender identity, and everything. And I think it is a very interesting and important idea to have more middle managers from diverse backgrounds to engage with more female audience.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Sangmi. I'm glad you mentioned Jenny because I was going to go to her next. She's flown back to Finland, so hopefully but I can see she's on the call. But I can see she's on the call, so I will call you in a minute. Because Wolfgang, I've got a question here from Wolfgang Blau, which I think relates to what the point Jenny might be able to help with, which is, did we look at difference in preferences of women for different types, topics, or tonalities of news compared to men? And you remember in various newsrooms you worked on, there's an assumption that women responded more strongly to constructive news. That wasn't in our data. We had that data about political news and health and education news, but we didn't look at the gender differences in terms of tone or type. But Jenny, who works for Helsing and Salamat in the kind of lifestyle magazine section, I think has some input on there. Jenny, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Welcome.
Hi.
Can you put your camera on?
Nice to be here again. So my camera is apparently not working, but you can hear me, so I think.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, I have to say I agree with Sam.
We've just lost you there. Jenny, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, there you are.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, nice to see you.
Hi. So yeah, this has been really interesting, and also I have to say I totally agree with Sangmi what she said about for instance, the health news not just being for women, and then this is something that I actually wanted to come back to for a while, because this is something that I have witnessed, especially during the last year that I have started working in a daily newspaper and bringing more lifestyle and sorts of female genres into a newspaper environment. And so what Sangmi said, and building on that, I agree that on one hand, we have to make those women's issues mainstream, and we have to report on them everywhere, also in the daily newspaper, and also make them like the public daily agenda. But on the other hand, we have to make sure that we don't market specific genres only to women, but we have to, and this is something that we have done, because I started my career in lifestyle magazines that were heavily targeted at women, and then there's a woman on the cover, and they are not sold mainly for men, and that kind of makes you feel like these certain genres are actually like health, because I mainly work in health journalism, and I think it's a problem if you think that this sort of big topics are only meant for women. So this is something that we have been trying to do now that we are in this more like gender neutral newspaper environment. We are trying to market all types of journalism and all types of genres to everybody. So I think that's the important next step.
I think one thing you said that was really interesting there was when you ran features that were to do with insecurities, mental health issues, insecurities over looks, for example. If it was in a print magazine, a man would never have picked up the kind of magazine to buy it. But what you were finding, because you have the data on this, is that men were kind of paying to read these articles online.
Mm-hmm. I think, interestingly, I think it's because when you take it out from the physical magazine environment and you publish it online, the first thing you see is the headline, which doesn't necessarily say anything about gender. So when you click on a headline, an interesting headline, you don't necessarily think about who it is for. So you kind of secretly start reading it and maybe realize in the middle of the story, or you don't realize it at all, that this is like this type of a story would have been earlier been published in a women's magazine. And I think that's very important in a way, because that also shows that these stories are actually for everybody. And one thing that we also, I think I mentioned this earlier at one point, that one thing we noticed when we started doing lifestyle content, making lifestyle content in Helsingin Sanomat, in the online news environment, is that some of these issues, such as men's body image issues, are largely underrepresented, because these types of stories are usually targeted for women. So this is also something that we want to address.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in Kathy here. Hi, Kathy, who's back in Toronto, to just see if you want to. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Lovely to see you too. I'm missing everybody. We've had seminars about constructive journalism, which again relates to Wolfgang's point. And I know you've done a lot of workshops and done a lot of thinking on this. And do you want to kind of add to this conversation what your feeling is about whether women respond to news from different tones?
Sure. Thanks, Meera. Well, first of all, thank you for an amazing term. I came away with such a deep understanding that who is at the table, who has a voice, really does matter. This was such an unusual experiment to have an all-female fellowship group. And, you know, I've been at many tables through the years, and I always sort of play this little game where I look around the room and count the number of women. And it's usually about 20%. And I've been in many seminars where the goal is to, you know, we need to get women's representation to 30%. So here we had a situation where women were 100%. And you know, you brought that great seminar together on the 19th, where, you know, an all women news site. I really came to understand that when women feel listened to, when they feel heard, that their perspectives and the stories that they think matter are going to rise up to matter, and that, you know, we shouldn't be satisfied with 30%. Probably 100% is not going to happen, but your key thing is equality at the tables. But I also, picking up on what Jenny just said, it's not about kind of isolating, you know, that there's some kind of special women's story. It's all issues are women's issues, but it's the perspective that comes when there is a diversity of voices at the table and mutual respect at the table.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And I'm going to bring in the last fellow here, Evelyn, who's also here. Hi, Evelyn. Can you hear us? Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, he's back in Sweden.
Yeah.
And we've had so many discussions about Sweden. We had a conversation, we had a day yesterday on vaccine reporting with journalists from around the world, including one of your colleagues from Dagens Nyheter. And I think everyone is really obsessed with what's Sweden doing now. But you work for the premium desk of Dagens Nyheter. So again, you have data on what is converting people to stories. And do you want to talk us through a little bit whether, you know, what your sense is about format and tone and what works amongst men and women, and if you think there's any difference or if there is no difference?
I think there might be a difference. Like we found when we've worked a lot on subscriptions and trying to see what makes people get a subscription, it's well, as we found a lot of the same things as Jenny was talking about, the fact that there's been like lifestyle has become more important, and a lot of people obviously want to read about that, especially when it's done in a like high quality way. But also I think that there's sometimes we try not to talk too much about like what do women like, what do men like, the same like Jenny was saying as well, because there's also not just that men also obviously are interested in the lifestyle issues, but also that women obviously are also interested in like the hard stories and politics and everything. But it's more about like finding, especially for subscription writing, finding the compelling stories and the stories that will like universally appeal to both genders, but not like alienating women in the reporting, I think. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Hi, thanks very much, Evelyn. That's interesting. I think it is true about, and it relates back to Rebecca's point about diversity in the newsroom and having different voices, because it's not just about gender, it's about diversity on every level. And what you end up with is a more, firstly, a more rounded product, but also a more diverse and a different perspective on the news and a more rounded perspective on the news, which stops you having blind spots. So stops you kind of completely missing a story that's happening right under your nose, which is something that Dorothy Byrne, the former head of Channel 4 News, has said to us repeatedly, that if you don't have a properly diverse newsroom, you will literally get the news wrong. You will not understand what's going on. And then crucially, it then kind of makes the voice more interesting, makes the voice of the newsroom more interesting. You get a different type of storytelling, different formats, different visuals being selected by people. I think you do end up with a better product. Because
and also what I think someone was saying this before as well, but the fact that if you take these stories that are typically like written by men and where the people interviewed are typically men, and just reverse that a little bit, then also women as well as men will be more inclined to want to read, because you kind of just change the tone a little bit in the same kind of story and you'll appeal to more people, I think, anyway.
I'd like to think so as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And Katerina, you made a very good point. And do you want to kind of jump on the call there? Katerina Carvalho, our visiting fellow who's been in the room with us quite a lot and is now back in Portugal, who talked about it. Actually, it's about human rights, actually not having blind spots. I think you're absolutely right. It's about absolutely being correct. Do you want to join in, Katerina? Can you speak? Hi.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me, but you can see me. So
we
how
can't hear you, but that's okay.
It is okay. So yeah, I was part of this wonderful group, and one of the things that I think is as really has been very sensitive for me is that the way that when we have 100% cohort, there's no judgment. I mean, there's less judgment than when you want to do like a group thinking. And that was very interesting. And I'm not that kind of very, I don't have that feminist very much. I'm not very feminist formed journalist. I worked with men all my life, and that's maybe why. And even though these past 2 months that we had in this room were wonderful, because everybody could speak freely. And I think that's one of the things that the newsrooms need to do, not only with women, but with everybody else. One of my mottos now is be yourself. Like, don't try to think like the others like you think the others want you to think.
Do you think that would work? I mean, you've worked in a newsroom and you've been editor-in-chief, and you've also been, you've been a journalist at every single level. At what level do you think people can be themselves? Do you think you'd be from the beginning, or do you need to reach a certain level of seniority first?
I think that's one of the problems that, and we've been speaking about that in these last months. People only start to think as they think when they get a certain level of seniority, and part of a good leadership is to do that since the beginning, because we really need to do that. I'm working with 5 young people now, and I really do that effort to not over talk them, to not explaining things to them. You have to listen to everybody. You have to listen to what they have to say, and not to what you think they should say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If I can go back to the room with the Reuters Institute fellows in it,
Because one thing we did really talk about here was, and Ramisha, you touched on this, was curation of the news and news selection. And I think this is one area where it's almost kind of a thing that can be discussed now, which stories get pushed to the front, because on the data where I looked at when it said women don't tend to go to home pages of news sites, they're much less likely to go to the home pages of news sites. And there's other data that says they're more likely to trust news that they get through messaging apps and through their communities. This is partly because of who's curating the news and who's putting it in front of them. Do you think this is something that can be changed on news sites? And if you were curating the home pages of a news site and you wanted more women, what would you put on the front page? What would be your instinct?
Well, I mean, from a journalist perspective, definitely what would be on the first page and what would be the leading news story would be something, something which is intriguing, something which is the top story. I mean, that doesn't change, but the whole outlook of the first page or whole outlook of how many sections do you have on your website, that majorly affects if there is a woman on the table. Because right now, what we are dealing with is that women issues or stories related to women, I mean, this is kind of what people think is that if they give us whole section, just like there's a whole section for science, there's a whole section for sports, they dedicate a whole section to women's stories as well. So according to them, this is quite a privilege that they're giving to women, so that when they come on their website, when they are reading news on their website, they would find it something, special. But what happens is that people don't, or women especially, don't end up clicking on that particular tab, and they don't make much effort to actually go on the tab and open the stories and then see what's going on with women around the world or with women in Pakistan. So what I would suggest is that to make it a part of the main page, to make it a part of the front page, to deal those stories as something which is important, because we as the news, as the people who deliver news, we as the people who sometimes make news as well, we can actually bring about this change by letting people know that, okay, this is also very important, because this is how we are dealing with things during the pandemic. Because there was a time when everybody wanted to hear everything related to Corona, and that was the time after a few months when we realized that no, we need to give them something else as well, so that they can know that there's more to it, there's more to the world except coronavirus. And then we started giving them detailed articles or informative videos and everything. And so when we were putting in effort in doing that, so why not when it comes to women issues? Why not when it comes to gender equality issues? Why not when it comes to news regarding transgenders or other sexes or other genders and everything? So yeah, I mean, that's what I think, that I mean, when a woman is on table, the best thing is, just like Sangmi mentioned about Anu, who was the chief and editor of Helsinki Sanoma. So I was very inspired by her, and she also gave her. I asked her a question that if a woman is on the top, if a woman is in the leadership of a newspaper or a news organization, does that news organization focus more on women issues? She told me that there's a much significant difference, which means on one hand, if we see it positively, which means that the news outcome is still more egalitarian, more equal. And this is what we want. We don't want it lopsided. So yeah, I mean, this is what I suggest. This is what I feel like it should be, that women issues or gender issues or issues related to other sexes as well, they should be a part of the main page. And I mean, don't really give them a separate tab. Who goes there anymore? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Caitlin, who's also in the room, I think you're the one who typed this comment in about kind of feminine and masculine frames. Do you want to expand on this comment? Okay, that's Caitlin.
I'm sorry, can you come again?
Explain the whole that we need to mute and then we can hear it.
Sorry, Meera, I did not hear your question. Can you please come again?
Could I ask Caitlin to expand on her comment, please, in the chat function.
Okay. Meera, could you repeat the question for us, but hold a second while we unmute here.
Thank you.
Sorry, 1 second, and
I can hear you fine.
okay, go for it.
Okay, I think you're the one who typed in the response to Wolfgang about saying if constructive news isn't more likely to be produced with a feminine frame. So something we spoke about during our sessions was changing the language to speak about feminine and masculine traits rather than women and men. So podcasts were thought to be male-only interest until women started making them.
Yeah, I think I typed that to the panelists instead of to Wolfgang, but yes, exactly as you said, one of the important things that we spoke about was that we try not to speak about this from a male and female perspective, because really it is a masculine and feminine issue, and there are men who can approach things with very feminine energy, and there are women who can approach things with a very masculine energy. And obviously, speaking here from personal experience, I tend to approach things with a lot more masculine energy, which in the sort of early 2000s was like, okay, if you want to succeed as a woman, have masculine energy. And now
it's the lean-in scenario.
Yeah, and now in the sort of 20s, it's now switched to, okay, if you want to succeed as a woman, have very feminine energy, and it's almost like be as feminine as possible and don't be assertive so that we can control you and move you up the chain. So there has been an interesting switch there, but I think we should continue to try to have this conversation from a masculine and feminine perspective, because I think it's more helpful in the long run. And I think the reason constructive journalism works is because it's journalism with a feminine frame.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And I put something in the chat, which I think is really worth highlighting, which was an article published last year looking at the gendered implications of fake news for women in politics. And what this looks at is kind of sexist, biased reporting and misinformation, and how this very directly affects politics, and crucially, how it affects the coverage of political leaders. Because while I don't really like ending every single talk on journalism with a talk on misinformation, because I think the two are very separate, and it's not always the role of journalists to only fight misinformation. I think in areas like gender, what you start getting is rumor spilling over into reporting and having very real outcomes on the political process. So you start ending up in a system where biases in the treatment of candidates based on gender may be exacerbated by the promulgation of fake news. And this in turn, this is kind of the treatment of Hillary Clinton in the 2016 elections. And this in fact, in turn has very real life political consequences that then reinforces the kind of decision making and the fact that women are then pushed out of the political sphere. If I turn to Rebecca there, sitting next to Ramisha, hi. Who is head of the BBC Disinformation Unit as well. Have you seen any kind of differences in your work in kind of disinformation? Do you have any kind of experience of kind of fake news about women and female politicians being spread differently to that of men? Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually just, as you said that, I thought, aha, I know what's going to happen now. Mira's going to come to me and ask me something that I'm not quite going to remember. But I'm trying to recall, there was a female MP that was, there was some complete misinformation to do with her, was it injuring a squirrel in some way? I think she was a Lib Dem MP or something. I would be sort of frantically Googling if I had a few more seconds. And this came up during the most recent sort of electoral cycle. And it was absolute nonsense. And it sort of spread like wildfire in a way that, frankly, those of us who were kind of observing what was going on would have been surprised if she had been male, because there was all sorts of things sloshing around that just simply, there we go, the false squirrel story goes viral.
The former Lib Dem
squirrel goes viral. So, and there was definitely in the huge amount of the comments and the sort of the sharing and the forwarding of that, more than a tinge of misogyny about the whole thing. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we see very gendered motivations behind spreading of mis and disinformation. Is it sort of, what are the reasons behind that? I think it's just another weapon in the arsenal of those people who want to suppress women, and they use it in ways that they do in the same way as sort of threats and hate comments and things like that. But I think those of us who are kind of on the disinformation front lines and who are female perhaps have a sharper eye for it than others, and can maybe see the extra tinges of misogyny that are evidently there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sang-mi, in Korea, your coverage of female politicians in particular, Sang-mi? Can I ask in particular of coverage of female politicians?
Oh.
Wait, okay.
The coverage of female politicians in South Korea, I think, has again been very gendered.
I think she asked about the coverage of female politicians in South Korea.
Oh, okay, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, recently, we have a female minister of Department of Justice, and she resigned yesterday. And there has been like a huge political dispute between her, the Minister of the Department of Justice, and the top manager. I'm not so sure the name of the position in English. I'm sorry, but the top, the highest ranking position in the Department of prosecution. I'm sorry, but she has been leading politician in South Korea for years, and she has been admired by so many female voters and young women, because it is very rare for us to have a female leading politician in South Korea. And she has been attacked and trolled so much because of this political dispute, and she has been portrayed as a like witch or female politician with a very fierce and violent energy against men on the internet and on many news articles. And I find it very disturbing and troubling for many male political journalists to cover her or portray her as a like not as an agreeable politician for many candidates, not for many voters, which is very disturbing. But she had to resign because of this, and it means that we haven't been doing a good job covering female politicians in South Korea.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm just going to put a photo story in chat today, which Simja Andy, who one of our researchers who's worked on a lot of this work on gender with me, sent me today, and it's the Paris mayor Anne Hidalgo was fined for, she was told she'd broken the law by naming too many women to senior posts. So 11 women and 5 men had been promoted in 2018, breaching a 2013 rule designed to bring about gender parity in employment. I think this is a lovely note to end on, because firstly, the fact that it happened, firstly, the fact that it's been reported by the BBC in a kind of gentle, slightly mocking tone, but also crucially, the fact that she's kind of happy to just say, yep, it happened, I'm happy to be fined. And, you know, we are moving towards a situation where hiring more women than men, having more women than men in the fellowship, having more women than men in a room can be the normal. And if this happens in enough areas, we will end up with some semblance of gender parity, hopefully. And in a year where, like we've said in various seminars, women have essentially disappeared from the public stage in so many ways, because they have not been invited to speak as scientists, as politicians, because they have been deluged under the kind of obligations of housework and working from home and childcare with no schools. I think women have really struggled to kind of maintain their public voice. And it's very heartening to see that in the middle of these pressures, there are trends going the other way. And on that note, I just want to say thank you to all my lovely journalist fellows who, like I said, who have fought this term and the pandemic and come and sat in this room freezing cold, and added so much to the fellowship. And like you said, I think the ability to be grumpy and strident and angry, as well as collaborative and constructive and friendly, has been wonderful for all of us, and it's been such a privilege. So thank you all, and thank you all very much for joining, and thank you all in the chat room as well for putting up with all the technical difficulties, for trying out various different new systems in the room to make sure we can carry on our webinars next term. And we will be carrying them on next term. We're going to pause for 2 weeks over the Christmas break, and we'll be back on the 6th of January for a conversation about trusted journalism with Benjamin Toff. Thank you very much. Have a happy Christmas and New Year, and see you in 2021. Thank you.